Hello everyone, welcome back to Inain's Forensic Classroom. In earlier videos, we covered what expert testimony is and how methods like the Frye Standard work. Now we're going deeper. Today, we are going to understand the Daubert Standard and Federal Rule 702, which guides how courts decide whether to accept or reject expert testimony. So these two are extremely important in forensic science and in the legal world because they help the court ensure that the expert evidence presented is reliable and based on proper science. So let's understand what is Federal Rule 702 of the US Federal Rules of Evidence. So this rule basically explains when and how a person can be accepted as an expert in court. So according to the rule 702, a person who is qualified as an expert by knowledge, skill, training, experience, or education can give their opinion in court only if certain conditions are met. Now, what are these conditions? The expert knowledge must help the judge or jury understand the evidence or decide an important fact. So the testimony must be based on sufficient facts or data. The testimony must be the result of reliable principles and methods, and the expert must have applied those principles and methods correctly to the fact of the case. So in simple terms, Rule 702 says it is not enough to call yourself an expert. You have to prove that your methods are reliable, your conclusions are based on data, and your work actually helps the court understand something complex. So for example, if a forensic scientist is testifying about a DNA match, they must show that they followed a standard laboratory process, they have used reliable equipment, and that their results are supported by scientific data. So that's what make their testimony admissible. Now, before the Daubert case, the courts in the US followed Frye Standard. Before Daubert, there was Frye Standard, which we have already discussed in the previous video. So the Frye rule said that scientific evidence was admissible only if it was generally accepted by the experts in that field. But this rule had a problem. It was too rigid. It rejected many new but reliable scientific techniques simply because they weren't popular yet. So there was a need for a better and more flexible system. And that's when Daubert came into the picture. So Daubert Standard, the story actually begins in 1900s with a case which was Daubert versus Merrill Daw Pharmaceuticals. So the story had two young boys. The names were Jason Daubert and Eric Schuller. So they both were born with serious birth defect, which we call as NAS, neonatal abstinence syndrome, which is basically a group of problems that occur in newborn baby who was exposed to the addictive drugs while in the mother's womb. So in this condition, it is the mother who is taking the drugs during pregnancy, but the baby suffers withdrawal symptoms after birth. So when the baby is born and the drug supply stops suddenly, the baby's body starts reacting. So this is what we call as withdrawal. So the common symptoms of NAS include irritability, high-pitched crying or tremors, feeding difficulties or vomiting, diarrhea, and sometimes seizures. So the parents basically believed that a drug called bendectin, which was produced by Merrill Daw Pharmaceuticals, caused these defects. So what did parent do? They filed a case against the company and brought in several other expert witnesses who presented new scientific studies suggesting that bendectin could cause birth defects. So, however, these studies were not published in recognized scientific journals and they were not generally accepted by most scientists at that time. So the pharmaceutical company argued that, and according to Frye standard, these studies should not be accepted because they lacked the general acceptance in the scientific community. Now the trial court agreed with the company. It rejected the expert testimony and ruled in favor of Meraldo Pharmaceuticals. Now the parents appealed the decision, and the case finally reached the US Supreme Court. And this is where the real turning point came. The Supreme Court decided that the Frye rule was outdated. Science was adapting rapidly, and relying only on general acceptance was not enough to judge whether scientific evidence was valid. So in 1993, the court introduced a new standard known as Daubert Standard. So the Daubert decision gave more power and responsibility to judges. The court said that judges should basically act as gatekeepers. So they must check whether the expert scientific evidence is reliable and relevant before it's shown to the jury. Now, to help the judges decide this, the court gave a few important factors, which are now called as Daubert factors. So we have Daubert factors. The first one is testability. Now, can the theory or technique be tested, or has it been tested? For example, if a new fingerprint detection method should be capable of being tested and verified by others. The second is peer review and publication. So if you have a method, so has the method been reviewed or published in scientific journals? So this shows that other experts have checked it and they have found it trustworthy. The third factor is error rate. So what is the known or possible error rate? For example, if you have a digital forensic tool, you should have a known level of accuracy or failure. The fourth one is standards and controls. Now, are there standards that control how the method should be used? And fifth factor was general acceptance. So even though it is not the only factor, whether the method is generally accepted by expert in that field is still important. So these points are not strict rules, but these are basically the guidelines to help the judges decide whether the expert evidence is reliable enough to be used in the court. So in simple terms, Rule 702 gives the legal framework, and the Daubert Standard provides the practical test to check the reliability. Now, both work together to make sure that expert testimony presented in the courts is scientific, logical, and helpful for decision making. So this approach basically protects the justice system from unreliable or junk science, and it also ensures that forensic experts stay careful, scientific, and transparent in their methods. Now, why it matters for forensic experts? So for forensic scientists and students, understanding these standards is very important. It teaches us that courts care not just about what you say, but how you reach that conclusion. And to make your work credible in court, you should always use scientifically proven and validated methods, and keep a detailed record of your observations and procedures. You should always mention the limitations and possible error rate of your technique. So be prepared to explain your methods clearly and confidently. This shows that your findings are reliable and scientifically sound, even if you are testifying in an Indian court. So this was all about expert testimony and the rules based on which expert testimony is admissible in the court of law. If you found this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe to Inain's Forensic Classroom. See you in the next video. Bye.